Okay, let's unpack this. Picture a Manhattan penthouse. It's 2011. The host, a big-time real estate developer. But the guest list: Bono, Chuck Close, Clay Oldenburg, Morley Safer, Tom Brokaw, Carl Bernstein. I mean, what a mix, right?
Wow, yeah.
Yeah.
A real collision of worlds.
And they weren't there for the skyline views. Not primarily, anyway. They were there for one guy, Frank Gehry, the architect who actually designed the building they were standing in.
And that's the fascinating thing, isn't it? By 2011, Gehry had become something really rare, an architect everyone knew, like way beyond just architecture circles.
Absolutely.
He wasn't just, putting up buildings. He was crafting these experiences that kind of blurred the lines between architecture and art, sometimes in ways that were, well, pretty out there.
Yeah, you think about his own house in Santa Monica, this almost like playful rebuild of a Dutch colonial with plywood and corrugated metal.
Oh, yeah. Definitely not what the neighbors signed up for, I bet.
Not at all. And so, for this deep dive, we're going way back. We're peeling away those famous titanium curves, those sculptural shapes, to really explore the influences, the early chapters of Frank Gehry's career.
Right. We've really dug into excerpts from this incredibly insightful biography. And the mission today is to unearth those surprising details, those key moments that really forged his unique way of seeing things.
So let's start right at the beginning. Frank Gehry was actually born Frank Goldberger in Toronto.
And his Jewish heritage is, well, it's a really crucial thread to follow. It weaves all through his early life and how he saw the world.
Toronto back then, 1920s, 30s, the Jewish population was growing. But sadly, that also meant more suspicion, more prejudice, really, from the Protestant majority. There was even talk of a law targeting Yiddish signs.
Wow.
Yeah, and these fears about communism often got tangled up with anti-Semitism, partly because, Jewish people were quite involved in labor movements back then.
So if you look at the bigger picture, you see this cultural climate where Jewish people were often kind of pushed to the margins, seen as outsiders.
Right. And Gehry's own father, Irving Goldberg, he had left-leaning politics, a personality maybe not quite fitting the mold. That probably amplified that feeling of being, well, different.
Definitely.
But, and this is so important, there were also these incredibly powerful, positive influences, especially his maternal grandmother, Leah Kaplan.
Ah, yes.
This is where it gets really interesting. She used to play with him using these wonderfully odd, scraps of wood left over from her husband's hardware store. He later said it was the most fun I ever had in my life, like a genuine license to play.
A license to play. I love that.
And it wasn't just wood. While she was baking challah, she'd give him bits of dough, like, proto-Play-Doh for him to shape and mess around with. The Kaplan house itself seems like it was a really important place for him.
That early license to play, totally free from any kind of formal rules.
Yeah.
It feels like it planted a seed, didn't it? This lifelong willingness to experiment, to kind of break things down, almost a precursor to his later work.
Yeah, like deconstructivism before it was even a thing.
Exactly. And that tactile stuff, messing with the wood and dough, it likely fostered this deep curiosity about how things fit together, how they come apart.
And then there was the other side, his paternal grandfather, his approach to Judaism, studying the Talmud.
Right, that was different.
It wasn't about just finding the right answer. It was the constant questioning, why this, why that? He felt the question was just as important as the answer. He later said that was a huge takeaway from being Jewish, this iterative process of always digging deeper.
So that constant questioning, that iterative process,
yeah.
Did you see that feeding directly into his design process later? Like always challenging his own ideas?
Oh, absolutely. I think that emphasis on questioning, on not just accepting things, that's another cornerstone, right? That Talmudic tradition of really debating, exploring ideas from all angles. It seems like it built this deep curiosity in him, this readiness to challenge the way things were always done in architecture.
Makes perfect sense.
So the family actually moved to Brooklyn for a bit, just a few months when Frank was a baby, then back to Toronto. Things got a little better financially.
Okay.
They could rent, and then eventually they even bought a 2-story brick house on Dundas Street West. But then, a big change, they moved to Timmins, Ontario.
Ah, Timmins. That sounds like a shift.
A huge shift. It was a totally different world from Toronto. Here, Frank ran into really blatant anti-Semitism.
Right.
He was the only Jewish kid in his school. And the town itself had these other ethnic tensions bubbling up, not just religious ones. Being the outsider there must have really hit home.
Yeah, that experience, being so visibly other, must have left a real mark.
It absolutely must have. But his mother, Thelma, she was crucial in kind of buffering that. She really believed in education, in culture.
Right.
She consciously made an effort to expose him to things. Trips to the Art Gallery of Toronto, the Royal Ontario Museum. He always remembered the mummies there.
Huh? Mummies. Classic kid fascination.
Totally. And symphony concerts at Massey Hall. She even wanted him to take piano lessons, but they just couldn't afford it.
That's tough.
But he learned to play by ear anyway, though he apparently always regretted not getting formal training, especially, he mentioned, cello and piano.
Thelma's drive to give him that cultural exposure, it really shows this desire for him to rise above, their circumstances, the prejudice. Even with limited money, she pushed for art and music. That says a lot about her belief in him.
It's such a poignant contrast, though, to his relationship with his father, Irving, which was difficult.
Yeah, the biography touches on that quite a bit.
Irving struggled professionally, first in Toronto, then later in LA. His frustration just grew and grew. He started calling Frank an impractical dreamer.
Ouch. That must have stung.
And there were even times he was physically abusive, though Frank's sister, Doreen, remembered him being gentler with her. But despite all that, both kids stayed loyal to him.
That dynamic with his father,
Yeah.
it sounds like a real source of tension. Maybe even, a need for Frank to prove himself. Being called a dreamer might have actually pushed him harder to make his ideas real.
Could be. So, 1947, the family packs up and moves to Los Angeles.
The land of opportunity.
Exactly. Drawn by this image of LA booming, this whole new way of living. But the reality, maybe a little less shiny.
Well,
The freeway system was barely there. The old streetcars were still everywhere. And their first place, a tiny one-bedroom furnished apartment on West 9th Street.
cramped.
Totally cramped. Murphy beds, and get this, constant battles with bed bugs, lice, cockroaches.
Oh, wow. So the LA dream started out pretty rough, that vivid picture of just striving despite it all.
And things got worse for Irving in LA. His health really declined. Mood swings got worse. His work selling door-to-door was patchy. He struggled just to keep up appearances.
That must have been hard to watch.
Doreen, his sister, remembered him having trouble just climbing the stairs and this feeling of depression hanging over their little apartment. His heart was getting weaker, diabetes worsening.
Yeah, seeing his dad struggle like that, the emotional strain on everyone, especially Frank, must have been immense. Maybe it just hardened his resolve to carve out his own path, something more secure.
Okay, let's fast forward a bit to Frank's early architectural education. He starts making connections in LA. People like Arnold Schreier, the photographer Julius Schulman.
Right, building that network.
Yeah, and through them, Harwell Hamilton Harris, Cal Stroud, both taught at USC, where Frank ended up going. He admired these guys, the modernists,
Yeah.
but he definitely felt this pull to do his own thing, not just, join the club and fit in.
That urge to find his own voice, even early on, that's classic Gehry, isn't it? Respecting the modernists, but knowing he had to push beyond them.
His first experiences in architecture school, though, he felt like an outsider again.
That tracks.
And here's a really fascinating bit. He had this visceral negative reaction to Mies van der Rohe's Farnsworth House.
The Farnsworth House, wow. An icon, what didn't he like?
He found it too militaristic, too rigid, ultimately impractical for actually living in. Which is funny because he later said he respected Mies himself a lot.
That's really telling. Rejecting its coldness, its impracticality,
Yeah.
it shows his early focus diverging from that pure minimalist modernism, right? Thinking about the human element.
Yeah, while he could appreciate the, intellectual rigor of Mies, it didn't mesh with the messiness of daily life for him.
So what did he connect with?
Japanese architecture, big time.
Yes. That makes sense. A lot of modernists were looking east.
Exactly. The simple lines, the purity of space, but also this balance of warmth and spareness. It really clicked for him, like it did for Frank Lloyd Wright, too.
Right.
He even had what he called his Japanophile period, which kind of weirdly made it harder for him to fully appreciate the big European modernists at first, Mendelssohn, Gropius, Breuer, Le Corbusier, even though he knew they were important.
That Japanese influence seems huge. It offers something different from European modernism, didn't it?
Yeah.
Natural materials, flow, connection to surroundings. You can see hints of that in his later stuff.
Definitely. And his friendship with Greg Walsh at USC, starting in their third year, that was huge too.
How so?
Greg knew a ton about Japanese culture. So Frank dives into Japanese literature, studies Frank Lloyd Wright's Japanese art collection like crazy, even memorizes temple layouts.
Wow, deep dive.
Yeah. And they shared other interests too, like classical music, went to concerts together all the time.
So Walsh really helped deepen that understanding of Japanese aesthetics beyond just the surface level, broadened his horizons.
Totally. And their thesis project with Rene Pescara designing public housing down in Baja, California, that was pretty ambitious.
Public housing. Interesting.
Yeah, it was part of a real master planning project. They actually got paid for it, which apparently really impressed William Pereira.
Getting involved in that kind of socially minded architecture early on and getting recognition for it, that probably reinforced that idea of design serving a bigger purpose, a theme he comes back to later.
Then life throws a curveball. He gets drafted into the Army, basic training up in Northern California.
Ah, right, an interruption.
Big time. And his wife, Anita, was not happy, left alone with their new baby daughter, Leslie, after supporting him through school.
Understandably tough.
Yeah, it caused real tension. She felt like his Army service was something sort of inflicted on her. She ended up moving back in with her parents.
Oof, that really highlights the personal costs, doesn't it? And hints at cracks forming in the marriage already.
So Frank's doing architecture in the Army, but it's, designing day rooms at Fort Ord.
Glamorous.
Huh! Exactly. Very constrained. Rectangles, conventional feel. He was pragmatic, didn't push boundaries there. Which is interesting because American furniture design was exploding with innovation at that exact same time.
Right, so it was a period of just working within the rules. Maybe that actually clarified what he didn't want to do later.
Could be. After the Army, he heads to Harvard, enrolls in the city planning program.
Okay, Harvard, big leagues.
Yeah, but he kind of misunderstood what it was about. He thought it would align with his, left-leaning politics, his interest in socially responsible architecture, partly sparked by Garrett Ekbo saying architects shouldn't just do rich guys' houses.
Makes sense. He wanted to connect design to social issues.
But the program, it was mostly political science, economics, sociology, very little focus on actual architectural design. He was pretty disappointed.
Ah, a disconnect. That must have been a pivotal moment, realizing it wasn't what he expected.
Yeah, and when he realized he was in the wrong place, Joseph Louis Sert, who was heading things up, was totally inflexible, no transfers allowed. Frank apparently really resented him for that.
Wow, Sert just shut him down.
Yeah.
That probably didn't help his view of rigid institutions.
Probably not. But Harvard did make one concession. They let him stay on as a special student, just auditing courses. Ah, okay, so not a total loss.
Not at all. He had to work to support the family landscape architect Hideo Sasaki, then the firm Perry, Shaw, Hepburn, and Dean. But the auditing, that became the best part. He took courses way outside architecture. Anthropology with Margaret Mead and Ruth Benedict.
Whoa, Mead and Benedict, that's amazing.
He said it was his happiest time in any school, just soaking it all up.
That unexpected freedom to explore different fields, that must have been incredibly liberating. Especially anthropology, understanding human behavior, culture. You can see how that would feed back into his thinking about architecture.
Totally. So his auditing time is ending. There's another urban design conference at Harvard in spring '57. Anita wants to go back to L.A. Frank needs a job.
Decision time.
He thinks about going back to Victor Gruen's office. But Beta Zwicker, Gruen's planning head, says something discouraging. Frank later thought Zwicker was just insecure.
So uncertainty about where to land next. He wasn't the same guy who left L.A. His perspective must have shifted. No doubt. He did go back to Victor Gruen's office eventually, but he felt like he hit a ceiling there, wasn't moving up as fast as some others.
Really? Why did he think that was?
He had a few theories. One, he was shy, uncomfortable doing client presentations. Two, he tended to, ruffle feathers creatively, push things a bit. And later, he thought maybe they just saw him as kind of angry, like he didn't quite fit the corporate mold, even though he worked closely with Gruen himself and Rudy Baumfeld, Edgardo Contini.
That feeling of stagnation.
Yeah.
Probably pushed him towards going out on his own, doing work that felt more him, a tension between his artistic side and the corporate architect world.
Seems likely. One project from that time, though, was the Steves House, designed with Greg Walsh.
Ah, yes. What was notable about that?
Still had that Frank Lloyd Wright influence, definitely, but the construction was kind of rough.
Yeah.
Maybe budget issues, maybe a less experienced contractor, or cowboy contractor, they called him. Despite some mistakes, it looked okay, was the verdict.
Interesting. The right influence, but also that roughness. Hints of moving away from perfect finishes, maybe towards something more expressive, even deliberately unfinished.
Could be the start of it. And around this time, he starts spending more and more time hanging out with artists in L.A.
Ah, the arc scene connection. That becomes crucial.
Totally. It exposed him to totally new ways of thinking about form, materials, space,
Hmm.
pulling him further away from traditional architecture.
Right.
Which brings us to the Danziger studio.
Pivotal project.
Absolutely. The design was just striking. Using industrial stuff like galvanized chain link fencing, something he actually tested out on a garage in Venice first.
Bold move using chain link like that.
Totally. He took the simple dumb box idea and elevated it. Placed these two oblong volumes really carefully, almost like minimalist sculptures. A garden wall acted like a third box. Clear story windows for light.
And didn't it have a kind of floating look?
Yeah, a reveal at the base made it seem like it was floating slightly. It was just this really powerful early example of him balancing mass and plane, texture and form. It wasn't just functional, it was sculpture.
So professionally, things are starting to spark, getting really interesting.
Yeah, but personally, things were getting rough. He was drifting away from his family. His relationship with Anita was really strained. It hit a crisis point a couple of years before some gallery show, the Bengston Show.
That timing is interesting.
He felt miserable at home, guilty about being away so much.
That personal unhappiness must have pushed him deeper into his work. The art world connection maybe offered some kind of escape or validation.
Could be. His artist friend Ed Moses suggested he see a psychotherapist, Milton Wexler.
Ah, therapy enters the picture.
And then this really difficult confrontation with Anita. She lays it out, he's never there, not present for the family, and then she confesses she's been having an affair.
Wow, heavy.
Yeah. But ironically, Frank felt some relief. It eased his guilt about his own affair with Donna O'Neill.
Wait, he was having an affair too? With Tom O'Neill?
Yeah, he'd met her through Wexler, actually. She'd become a client. So even though he wasn't exactly innocent, he kind of took the moral high ground after Anita's confession. And Wexler apparently gave him an ultimatum, which pushed him to finally leave.
Man, that's messy. A real turning point, though. Wexler pushing him to make a choice.
Definitely. So after the split, his relationship with Donna O'Neill takes off. She sounds like a totally different personality.
How so?
He described her as flamboyant, arty, a free spirit, a big contrast to Anita.
Okay.
Their romance started one night after a party, driving home from a restaurant. He recalled it with the sense of his own, innocence at the time.
Sounds like it offered him a kind of liberation, excitement, maybe?
Yeah.
Her free spirit probably resonated with his own push for creative freedom.
They also got into sailing together, and Frank got really fascinated by the shapes, the architectural space the sails created.
Sailing. You can almost see how those curving sail shapes might have seeped into his later work, finding inspiration in unexpected places.
Totally. Eventually, though, he decides to move back into his old Hillcrest apartment in Santa Monica.
The one he gave his sister.
The very one. He'd given it to Doreen and her husband, Rolf Nelson. Wexler encouraged him to take it back. Frank was hesitant, but he rationalized it.
Awkward for his sister, I bet, but reflects his need for his own space again as he figured things out.
Right. Okay, let's shift gears completely. Furniture.
Ah, easy edges, the cardboard stuff.
Exactly. Made from corrugated cardboard. He teamed up with the artist Robert Irwin on it. They even had a show at the Pace Gallery in New York.
Big deal gallery.
Huge deal. Got a lot of buzz in the art world, but didn't really make much money.
It's still pretty radical furniture for the time, right? Using cardboard like that. More experimentation, blurring lines between art and design.
Totally. But Victor Gruen, his old boss, hated it.
Really?
Thought it was, beneath an architect. Damaging to Frank's reputation. Gruen actually offered him a partnership in the firm if Frank would drop the furniture line.
Wow, that's a serious offer.
But Frank refused. He chose the artistic exploration over the conventional career path.
That says everything, doesn't it? His commitment to his own vision, even if it cost him professionally in the short term.
But it did cost him. He decided to discontinue Easy Edges even though Bloomingdale's had orders waiting.
Oof.
Yeah.
That couldn't have gone over well.
Not at all. Marvin Traub at Bloomie's was furious there were legal threats. His fabricator, Jack Brogan, refused to make any more because Frank owed him money.
Yikes.
And it caused this huge rift. He was estranged from both Robert Irwin and Brogan for years because of it. He did eventually get the Bloomingdale's order filled by another factory in Orange County, but he lost a ton of money on it.
Man, the harsh realities of mixing art and commerce and fracturing those relationships sounds intense.
Yeah, but then things started shifting personally again. He meets Berta Aguilera. As her pregnancy progressed, some of those old tensions with friends and clients seemed to kind of fade.
A new chapter beginning.
Yeah, his sister Doreen was even Berta's labor coach for the natural childbirth, and their first home together as a married couple. Back to the Hillcrest apartment.
So Berta brought a new kind of stability, focus maybe, quieted some of the earlier storms.
Seems like it. Professionally, too, things kept developing. After that Pasadena Art Museum show where he used chain link fencing,
Right, the Danziger studio material.
he got really fascinated by it, saw it as versatile, cheap, kind of anti-Mies, like it had this humanity, this accessibility, didn't need to be perfect.
An anti-Mies idea again, moving away from perfection towards something more informal, expressive.
Exactly. He sketched out several house designs around then, Famillion, Wagner, Gunther, that never got built because of client issues.
Frustrating, but probably useful explorations.
Yeah, they let him dig deeper into this unfinished aesthetic he was interested in, inspired by artists like Pollock, de Kooning, Cezanne, the opposite of pristine, perfect architecture.
So not literally unfinished, but showing the process, the materials. Exposed structure, maybe asymmetry.
Right. Ironically, his own house remodel also got delayed. Not because of a client, but because he kept tweaking the design, driven by anxiety, curiosity, but also knowing he couldn't keep Berta and their baby son, Aleo, cramped in the Hillcrest place forever.
Huh. The architect is his own worst client.
Totally. So when the Santa Monica house was finally done, he loved showing it off to friends, colleagues. Didn't expect everyone to love it, though.
And did they?
Mixed bag. Arthur Drexler, the influential MoMA curator, called it a joke. And yeah, that got back to Frank.
Ouch. From Drexler, that's harsh.
Even Ann Douglas, Kirk Douglas's wife, apparently hated it, led to a really awkward party encounter. And another friend, Helena Hellman, disliked it so much she just left abruptly one night. Frank thought she was sick.
Wow. So the house was definitely provocative, challenging tastes, pushing boundaries of what a house should look like.
For sure, but even with those reactions, his national reputation was growing.
Okay, so people were noticing beyond just L.A. Yeah. Christophe de Menil, from the big art patron family, commissioned him to remodel her Manhattan townhouse, an old carriage house on the Upper East Side.
The de Menils, that's a significant commission. East Coast validation.
Big time. It kind of continued her family's tradition of supporting cutting-edge art and architecture. Interestingly, her brother Francois hired the more established Charles Guathmy around the same time.
So Frank's getting opportunities showcasing his style beyond California.
And he had a productive run back in L.A. too. Finished several houses, making up for those unbuilt ones. Got a big commission from Jane Spiller.
Spiller, what drew her in?
She'd seen the plans for the Ron Davis house and loved Frank's enthusiasm for corrugated metal. She had this narrow lot in Venice, wanted his vision for it.
Ah, the corrugated metal again, becoming a signature.
And he even dipped back into real estate development. Teamed up with artist friends Chuck Arnoldi and Laddie Dill in Venice.
What was the plan there? To build affordable live work lofts for artists before the neighborhood got too gentrified and pricey, Frank put in his architectural services for a 1/3 stake.
Cool project. Shows his ongoing connection to that art community, trying to keep it viable, and lets him experiment more.
Exactly. Now, here's a really key insight into his thinking around this time. His growing, let's say, disdain for the formal architectural establishment, its rigid methods.
He was pushing against something.
Right. And that became a big driver behind his famous fish motif.
The fish? Yes.
Where did that come from?
He started using the fish shape everywhere lamps, sculptures, but also as the core inspiration for the curving forms in his buildings.
So the fish wasn't just decorative, it was fundamental, like a symbol.
Totally. It was his way of challenging the status quo, suggesting a history of form much deeper, more primal than just copying the Greeks or Romans.
Going back further to nature itself.
Exactly. He gave this lecture at UCLA where he basically asked, why do architects only go back to the Greeks? What about fish? They've been around forever. That's brilliant. Playful, but profound. Rejecting historical copies, finding inspiration in organic shapes.
Definitely. Okay, then comes the Temporary Contemporary Museum project.
Emosia's temporary space. That was huge for him, wasn't it?
Yeah, Pontus Hulton and Richard Koszalek invited him. He hesitated at first, maybe because they hadn't picked him for the main museum building design.
Understandable hesitation, but a great opportunity, even with a tight budget. Showed his adaptability, working with those old warehouses.
And the project itself was actually one of his simplest, design-wise, because of the budget. Mostly seismic upgrades, new mechanicals. He loved the warehouses themselves, thought they were perfect for contemporary art.
Right, sometimes the best intervention is minimal.
His touches were light but effective. Cleaned things up, sandblasted, painted white, added code stuff, and then that signature exterior canopy steel frame and chain link.
The chain link again?
Yep. And the whole thing was a massive success, way beyond expectations.
It really showed he could create amazing architectural experiences, even with constraints. The power of just space and light handled well.
Around the same time, he did this wild theoretical project with Claes Oldenburg and Cushy van Bruggen, working with students in Milan.
Theoretical, what was it?
They dreamed up this fantasy neighborhood for Venice, Italy. Think. A fire station shaped like a snake, an office building like a grand piano, a library inside giant binoculars.
Ah, pure imagination. Shows his playful side, totally unconstrained.
Then comes another huge connection. Rolf Feldbaum, chairman of Vitra, the furniture company.
Vitra, right.
Yeah.
He'd been interested for a while.
Yeah, ever since seeing the Easy Edges stuff. Feldbaum was also fascinated by LA, the Eames connection. He tried to reach Frank earlier, but it didn't work out.
So how did they finally connect?
They met at Oldenburg and Van Bruggen's studio in New York. Feldbaum was immediately impressed, invited Frank to visit the Vitra campus in Germany. After a fire there, Feldbaum commissioned Nicholas Grimshaw for a factory, Oldenburg von Bruggen for a sculpture, and then Frank got his first commissions from Vitra.
That Vitra connection was massive, right? A huge international step, leading to some really defining projects for him.
Absolutely. So his profile is rising, and he starts professionalizing his office more, hiring more staff, getting systems in place.
Makes sense? Growing pains?
Ironically, this happens right when the costs for the Walt Disney Concert Hall project start spiraling.
Disney Hall.
Nice.
A saga.
Total saga. And during this time, he makes the tough call not to offer a partnership share to Greg Walsh, his old friend and collaborator.
Ouch. Why not?
Partly because Walsh wasn't comfortable with the new digital tools like CATIA, which were becoming essential. Walsh was kind of shifting into more of a mentor role anyway. Eventually, Frank felt he had to let Greg go, partly to try and preserve their friendship outside of work.
And that's hard. Reflects how technology was changing everything in architecture and the difficulty of those long-term relationships.
Then there's the Peter Lewis house saga.
Oh yeah, the house that never was.
Exactly. Lewis, the billionaire philanthropist, wanted a Gehry house. They worked on it for 10 years, millions spent on design fees, but it just never got built.
10 years. Why not? Too ambitious. Budget.
Probably a mix of things, complexities, maybe second thoughts. But amazingly, their personal relationship survived it.
That's something. But illustrates how even with a willing client and a great architect, these grand visions can stall.
Meanwhile, Thomas Krenz at the Guggenheim makes a bold move.
Krenz, what did he do?
He basically bypasses the usual competition process and directly asks Frank to design a huge new Guggenheim for Lower Manhattan.
Whoa, skipping the competition. That's confidence.
Krenz had this massive vision. A titanium cloud on city-owned piers, even bigger than Bilbao.
Titanium cloud.
Wow.
That sounds ambitious for New York. Lots of hurdles there compared to Bilbao. But it definitely put Frank on the map as the go-to museum architect globally.
For sure. But remember Peter Lewis. His relationship with Krenz was apparently pretty strained, despite Frank trying to mediate.
Personalities and power dynamics.
Yeah. So the New York Guggenheim eventually gets scrapped. Political issues, costs. But then Frank gets the commission for a Guggenheim in Abu Dhabi instead.
Abu Dhabi. Okay. What was that design like?
Extravagant. These big cone-like structures clad in blue glass. Another massive statement piece showing the global demand for that Gehry museum brand. Back in LA, the Disney Concert Hall project is still stalled. Years go by.
Right. It looked dead in the water for a while.
Until Eli Broad steps in. The philanthropist, major LA power broker.
Eli Broad. What was his angle?
He basically decided LA couldn't afford not to build it, especially after Bilbao was such a global sensation. LA couldn't reject its most famous architect. He understood the politics, the funding. He muscled it through.
Broad's intervention was absolutely key. He used his clout to save the project, secure Gehry's landmark for LA.
But not all projects went smoothly. The Stata Center at MIT, that was different.
The Stata Center, right. What were the issues there?
Lots of resistance from scientists who loved the old, messy Building 20 it replaced. And the client was huge and complex, university president, faculty, students, all with different ideas.
Designing for academics. Notoriously tricky. Conflicting demands, tradition versus innovation. Must have required a unique approach to even get everyone talking.
Definitely. He also did the interior design for the Condé Nast cafeteria in New York.
The cafeteria. Interesting. How did that come about?
It was kind of a consolation prize after a house project for the Newhouse family got scaled back. They gave him pretty free rein.
So what did he do with it?
He played with these curving glass partitions, trying to mimic his metal forms, but in glass. Rounded booths. It had a different feel from, say, Philip Johnson's fancy Four Seasons restaurant. More industrial materials, but still very designed. Showed his versatility in a different kind of space.
Right. Bringing a style indoors to a corporate setting.
Now, shifting back to personal life and some really tough times, he'd been estranged from his daughter, Leslie.
Oh, that's right. You mentioned her earlier.
Then came the devastating news. She had advanced uterine cancer.
Oh, no. That's terrible.
Frank, despite the estrangement, jumped into action immediately. Used his connections, his friend Nancy Wexler, Herbert Parties at the hospital to get her the absolute best care possible.
Wow. So he really stepped up in the crisis.
He did, and Leslie, despite everything before, deeply appreciated his support during her illness. It shows a different side of him, that capacity for decisive action, for care, when things got really serious.
Absolutely.
Sadly, Leslie eventually passed away. And around that same time, he got another blow professionally. The Atlantic Yards Arena project in Brooklyn fell through.
The arena. What happened there?
Politics, economic problems.
Yeah.
They ended up deciding to use another architect's existing design to save time and money. Frank was gutted. The arena was the part of that huge controversial development he was most excited about.
Man, losing that project on top of losing his daughter. That's
Oh.
incredibly rough.
Yeah. The developer, Bruce Ratner, assured him his other piece of the project, the apartment towers, was safe, but the arena loss hurt.
Understandably.
But he kept working. The 8 Spruce Street Tower in Manhattan, also called Beekman Tower.
Ah, the weighty residential tower.
Right. What was interesting there was how carefully he studied the context, especially the old Woolworth building nearby, and Cesar Pelli's towers.
So responding to the surroundings more explicitly.
Yeah. He made the corners solid, but then used all these bay windows rippling across the facade to get that dynamic, Gehry-esque look, even with fairly standard room layouts inside. It showed he could adapt his style to a dense urban high-rise, making it distinctive but still connected.
Right. Fitting in while standing out.
Looking back at his whole career, this fascinating duality emerges, doesn't it? This guy who connects with ordinary material, ordinary people in some ways, but also clearly craves fame, recognition.
Yeah, that tension is always there.
And despite being world famous, mega successful, he kept living pretty modestly in that same Santa Monica house he'd remodeled decades earlier.
Kept his roots, in a way.
Expanded it slightly in '93, bought the lot next door later, but yeah. His office space in Venice evolved too, moved upstairs in 2012, creating more of a private inner sanctum, though still transparent. But you had to climb stairs to see him, change the feel a bit.
Little shifts reflecting his changing status, maybe, while still holding on to that Santa Monica base.
There was also a lawsuit in 2007 with Fred Nicholas over royalties for jewelry he designed for Tiffany. That ended their long, complicated relationship.
Business disputes happen.
And around this time, interestingly, he starts talking more about wanting to design more ordinary buildings, offices, apartments, and do them affordably. Like he wanted to prove he wasn't just about the spectacular, bespoke stuff like Bilbao or Disney Hall.
Trying to show his range, maybe push back against being typecast as only this architect for icons.
Could be. He also got frustrating with the guy running Gehry Technologies, Eric Myers.
What was the issue there?
Frank felt Myers didn't share his core passion, which was using technology to empower architects. He thought Myers was more focused on the construction industry side of things. Shows Frank's enduring belief in tech as a design tool.
Right, that passion for the architectural potential of technology.
Then comes another massive project, the Fondation Louis Vuitton in Paris, for Bernard Arnault, head of LVMH.
Ah, the glass sales building. That took a long time, right?
Over a decade. Faced a lot of public opposition, but Arnault was determined. Apparently he wanted to succeed where a rival's museum project had failed. LVMH poured huge money into it.
A statement piece for Arnault, and another huge, challenging commission for Gehry, a real landmark in his later career.
The design itself is fascinating. It's like two things. This opaque central iceberg, the galleries, clad in white fiber-reinforced concrete.
The solid part.
Surrounded, enveloped by 12 enormous curving glass sails that seem to float.
Okay, why the separation? The solid galleries inside, the expressive sails outside.
It was apparently a direct response to criticism that his earlier museums didn't always show art well, that the architecture overwhelmed it. This way, he could have his spectacular glass forms and provide neutral, functional gallery spaces inside.
Ah, learning from criticism, adapting his approach. Clever solution.
There were serious legal challenges trying to stop it, but it got saved behind the scenes.
Politics and power again.
He kept busy with other things too. A redesigned Novartis building in Basel, all curving glass, the IAC headquarters in New York, another glass facade.
Right, the IAC building. Looks like sales too.
Yeah. Collaborated with Julian Schnabel on a studio out in Montauk, had a more limited role on a project in Arles for Maja Hoffman. Someone else designed the main twisted aluminum tower there.
So still experimenting, still collaborating.
And then, kind of unexpectedly, Mark Zuckerberg hires him to design the Facebook headquarters in Menlo Park.
Zuckerberg. I thought he wasn't into architecture.
Apparently not. But Bobby Shriver suggested Gehry, and Zuck went for it. Shows Gehry's reach even beyond the usual art and culture clients.
Wow. From art patrons to tech titans.
In his later years, you also see these moments reflecting on art, friendship, loss. He designed the exhibition for his close friend, the ceramicist Ken Price, after Price died.
That must have been poignant.
Very. The last gallery had beautiful natural light. Frank wrote this moving essay for the catalog, drawing parallels between Price's shapes and his own work, like the California Aerospace Museum. He admired Price's courage to try new things late in life, the humor and beauty in his work.
A beautiful tribute.
He did something similar for Mildred Friedman's memorial in 2014. She was a curator who supported him early on, and he was deeply affected by Peter Lewis's sudden death in 2013. Gave the eulogy, apparently very heartfelt, even though he hated prepared speeches.
These moments really underscore the personal connections he built over such a long career.
Definitely. On a lighter note, he and Berta hosted Yo-Yo Ma for an Obama campaign benefit concert at their house. Frank was thrilled, wanted the concert inside to test the acoustics.
Ever the architect.
Though he was later disappointed with Obama's appointments related to the Eisenhower Memorial Project. And for his 85th birthday in 2014, they threw this amazing tribute for him back in Bilbao.
Bilbao, full circle.
Totally. Arranged by Juan Ignacio Vidarte, who ran the museum. Included a surprise video message from Daniel Barenboim, the conductor, whom Frank really admired.
What a moment. Recognizing the impact of that building and his whole career right where one of his biggest triumphs stands.
So wrapping up this deep dive, Gehry's journey, it's so clear how his early influences mattered. His grandparents, that license to play, the constant questioning, his mother pushing culture, that difficult relationship with his father.
Absolute foundational stuff.
And the move to LA, experimenting with cheap materials, finding his way with artists. It all fed into that unique style. Personal struggles, professional ambition, they were totally tangled up.
And ultimately, his real genius seems to be this incredible ability to absorb the specifics of a place, the bridge in Bilbao, the Woolworth building in New York, the LA landscape, and then transform those influences into something completely new. Forms that just have this incredible power. They invite you to interpret them, and they end up meaning more than just his own story.
Well, thank you for taking this deep dive with us into Frank Gehry's formative years and the influences that really shaped his vision. We hope it gives you maybe a fresh lens to see his later, more famous buildings through.
Yeah, and maybe a final thought for you to mull over. How do those early experiences the wood scraps, the questioning, the outsider feeling, how do they resonate when you look at his work now? Can you see that license to play he found so early on showing up in those complex, sometimes rule-breaking later designs?
Definitely something to think about. We really encourage you to explore more of Gehry's work and maybe check out the biography we drew from for an even richer